The longer it goes on, the more Hunter x Hunter is strongly characterized by a disillusionment and resultant rage at the state of the world and how it functions systematically and structurally. The story is filled to the brim with characters disenfranchised and dismissed, abused and stepped on for the gain of those in power, made to fend for themselves at the hands of greedy, underhanded, self-interested men with not a whit of compassion. The Phantom Troop as a whole, Gyro, Welfin, Beanolt, even Leorio to an extent. The world does not care for these people and leaves them in the dust, and from those ashes they have no choice but to forge a place for themselves through power or manipulation within the rigid structures that bind them. And there is no stronger example of that in the story than Morena Prudo. As we shockingly learn in the most recent material in the manga, Morena is a core player in the succession war at the head of the High Lee family that seems to be masquerading as an illegitimate child and second-track faker of Nasubi Huigoro in order to get a foothold and better progress towards her goal. Her original name is unknown, but it wasn't Morena, despite her taking the identity for herself now. Morena was horrifyingly born as a carnival orphan, which essentially means that the royal family arbitrarily selected her village as one to feast in and forced her mother to entertain the royals for several days without rest. Due to the tumultuous trauma, Morena's mother had no idea that she became pregnant or gave birth to Morena, and she died when Morena was 2 years old. Morena was then given her scar and sent to a base of operations for human trafficking run by the High Lee, where she was determined to be flesh rather than a second-track faker associated with the highest royalty who would be given special privileges in exchange for remaining hidden and silent. This meant that her fate was left to the whims of men who would abuse her in every conceivable way for 20 straight years. Eventually, Morena discovered her power and began to develop it, which allowed her to escape, take the identity of the real Morena Prudo, and pose as a second-track faker, which gave her the platform to become the new boss of the family 3 years prior to her first appearance in the narrative. Now, as much as Hunter x Hunter deftly covers a wide volume of societal corruption through its characters and themes, there is an idea that converges with that one to give us a near-complete picture of who Morena is. Commitment. Hunter x Hunter is in large part about commitment, resolve, and conviction, bringing about results through committing oneself wholly to one's respective cause, restriction, and pledge. And due to the most cruel and disgusting of upbringings imaginable, Morena is not lacking in commitment whatsoever. Her conviction is unyielding, and she gets results at any cost and through any method. And through this way of life, she is obviously embodying her own will through enacting the destruction that she'd like to see upon the world that left her completely alone and suffering. But there is also an element of her potentially fighting for the original Morena Prudo, the one whose place she has taken. And perhaps she is fighting against the unfairness that is directed towards second-track fakers as well through living through what they live through, in spite of how much of a leg up it gave her from her initial situation. I've seen some speculate about whether or not to take her words about Morena's grave literally or not. For instance, you could interpret her words here as her saying that her identity is hollow and of no consequence as she has become more of an embodiment of her goal than a person. And that would draw some huge parallels with another core piece of this arc, Crollo. But as for right now, I believe that she genuinely took on the identity of Morena through replacing the original in some way. Not through malice, but through necessity. And regardless of exactly what she means when she says this, the tangible end result is that she is Morena Prudo and all that entails in the present. And yet, having experienced what she experienced, this puts her at the perfect spot to be relatable. She is far from alone in having been tossed aside, and if you combine that with her unyielding conviction, you get a leader that is full of charisma and authority, but also one who is approachable and deeply relatable. One who has a plan and knows how to lead, but who is also willing to connect with others on a human level and relate to the agony of suffering. And her adornment of her Christ-like crown of thorns, the symbol of her suffering, and how it's led to becoming a spearhead for her people, it really speaks for itself. This is all a potent combination, and it has led to Morena building a little bit of a family of like-minded souls who find no place else to call home and who find solace in one another through relating to each other's pain. In another apt parallel, it's very similar to the Phantom Troop in this way, and also in that her followers are absolutely full of individuality. To a fault, they are clearly encouraged to express themselves however they'd like, even to the point of potential incompetence. Having lived through a life that stifles one's sense of self, it's clear that Morena encourages those who follow her to live freely and connect with one another. And this is something that she shows herself as well, as during her bouts with Borkson, she seems genuinely sad when the latter refuses to share personal details, when she refuses to reciprocate Morena's outreach, and when she cheats. There is obviously a duality here, and you can very much see the little girl who is not ever able to grow up, make friends, have a family, or even just live a humane life peeking through the unbending, beautiful, and fierce mask in these key moments. She desires bonds, she likes playing games, she can be cute and silly and fun, and there is a part of me that cheers whenever she's able to play at retaking a piece of the life that she never had. But above all else, once her motives are in play, that girl is shut away and replaced with a wickedness obtained through unimaginable trauma. A festering, poisonous rancor dictates all of her actions, and she will not rest until her will is done. And her power is indicative of this too, a variant of poison that entices all those who follow her, the origin and original infection of which finds its roots in mankind's cruelty. Morena only exists as she is, as the weapon of mass destruction against the world, because the world made her that way. Every bit of who she is, the malice and disdain, the softness and sadness, the quirk and tragic fun, the complexities and paradoxes, everything we see of Morena manifests exactly as it does because of years of abhorrent abuse, and Borkson's original stance against helping Morena's cause and how doing so would not lead to any personal benefit, nor would it be worth it in the end, is, while very understandable and human, a big part of the reason that people like Morena exist. They are passed by in the streets, almost invisible but not quite, and people feel bad for their plight, but due to the fear associated with sticking one's own neck out, the average person will simply not want to help. And so, hatred accumulates until you get Morena, someone who by all accounts is a sensitive soul, but who only sees one way for justice to be enacted. She's at once surrounded by like-minded people and yet lonely, at once terrifying and yet sad. Seeing these cute interactions and her nerdy fixation on games, you could easily forget who she is, where she's come from, and what she's done. But I suspect that those aspects to her stand out so starkly because they're a glimpse into the life that she could have led that was stolen from her, and the reason that she wants to burn it all. Clearly, on the way to her goal, Morena is looking, subconsciously or consciously, for the connections that she was deprived of early in life. How could she not? But first and foremost, as always, is her goal. She is defined most prominently by her hatred of humanity and the world, and she will stop at nothing. Destroy Kakin and then destroy the world. Eviscerate everything. Burn this dung heap to ashes. It's not as if she doesn't care about others, and it's not as if she doesn't desire other things, but when faced with a choice, there is only ever going to be one winner. Total annihilation through whatever means necessary. Just like a certain mysterious figure potentially skulking in the background of this story, Gyro. Morena is pushed ever onwards by her vitriolic resentment and rage, and is almost paradoxically, profoundly grateful for her scar, the symbol of her pain, for representing the reason that she is fueled to tear everything down. It is a constant reminder to never let her rage fade. It gives her a foundation, and it helps her remember who she is. Now, prior to the newest revelations about Morena's identity and backstory, this iconic line about her gratitude for her scar seemed like a powerful but simple sentiment about being thankful for the torrent of horror that her life had been because it opened her eyes to the grim nature of the world and empowered her to destroy it all. A motive that she considers to be the opposite of death, despite her resembling a messianic deathbringer. But now, none of that interpretation is invalid, it all still applies, but we can potentially add to it that she's grateful for the material means that she's gained through using that scar to impersonate a second-track faker for allowing her to be able to manipulate the system, claw her way up, and enact her will, providing us with clear parallels to Gyro, Seti, Krollo, Kurapika, and others, yet wholly her own person with human nuances and dimensions everywhere. We're seeing in real time this character come into her own in a way that I'd been dreaming about for ages. For years, I hung my hat on her potential and symbolism, but in recent chapters she has finally begun following through on the greatness that she promised in very substantial ways, and now she represents one of the best and most important characters in the Succession War. I've joked in the past about Morena being based for her motives, but the story really does just strengthen the vision with her writing and offer more and more sympathy the more chapters we get. So while I sincerely doubt that she'll actually be successful in a true way for what that would mean for the series, her motivations are arguably the most strongly defined in the arc, and her incredibly bleak, horrific morality works in a beautiful tandem with the innocence that we see glimpses of. Is it possible for her to change her goals with persuasion from others? Can she find some genuine warmth and salvation? Given Togashi's sometimes very cynical thoughts about the themes so closely tied to Morena, I wouldn't at all be surprised if her story ends up in failure and tragedy from her perspective, and not just because the alternative would result in the end of the story as we know it. But in spite of all the suffering she's caused, all the damage she could yet do, and what all of this means for the characters I love in this story, I cannot help but wish for some level of fulfillment or success for Morena before her story is done. Many thanks for watching.